Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you've just found this place, then welcome. And if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we explore and theorycraft different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Today, we are continuing our Gloomhaven series of character builds, where we're trying to take the character classes from the hit board game Gloomhaven and recreate them in Dungeons & Dragons. Today, we're going to be recreating the Squid Face class, or Cthulhu class. If you don't want any spoilers for this character class in particular, then feel free to come back and watch this video at a later time. I won't take any offense. But if you already know what the character class is, or you just don't care about spoilers, or you're curious as to how this character in particular is going to be created in Dungeons & Dragons, then feel free to come along for the journey. I'll pause now, but this will be our last and final spoiler warning before jumping into the actual build. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started. Today we are looking at making the Squid Face, or Cthulhu character class as it's commonly known, but as it's also known, we are making the Plague Herald. Plague Herald is a bit of an odd character class in Gloomhaven. They aren't exactly defined as a support, a tank, or a damage dealer. Their entire mechanics largely revolve around the poison condition from Gloomhaven, and applying poison to both enemies, but also to their allies. They can then remove that poison for added effects, like extra damage on their attacks, or other sorts of things. They also have access to some viable tanking cards, which can be a specific build, but they're probably at their strongest as a ranged damage dealer. They have plenty of access to ranged damage, as well as extra target ranged damage, or even just area of effect damage in general. Since they also revolve around the use of the poison condition so much, that damage really tends to add up. Plus, they also have a build that can use the curse condition to devastating effect in terms of both damage and support. Just like our music note character, we're going to want to try and get a source of curse in this build. Besides that curse, though, we're also going to want a lot of poison, which we'll just count as the poison condition or poison damage in D&D. We're going to want range damage, area of effect damage, some flying, as well as a very thematic bug-themed character. But before we start the actual build itself, let's look at their flavor text. Harrower is only the name given to this race in the common tongue, as the name in their own language of chitters and hisses cannot be easily translated. A single harrower, as typically seen by other races, is actually a swarm of thousands of insects who have merged their intelligence to form a hive mind capable of highly sophisticated thought. Though not necessarily evil, harrowers do have a poor reputation in polite society due to their nightmarish nature, unnerving chittering speech, and unique nihilistic perspective. Their lives are at once very fleeting due to an individual insect's short lifespan, and eternal due to the swarm's persistent, ever-breeding nature. Harrowers may also be shunned because of the reputation of the small sect of Plague Heralds, harrowers who embrace a world filled with corruption and illness. Either misguided or ignorant of other races' physiology, Plague Heralds believe that the spread of disease throughout a society will strengthen it and propel it towards great things. One should be wary of allying with a Plague Herald. Their ability to spread decay and death across both sides of a battlefield is a terrifying thing to behold. Starting at character creation now with our lineage, we are a Harrower, which is a brand new lineage for us. It's also one of the more unique lineages in Gloomhaven, or really any fantasy game for that matter. For us, this means we're going to have to use custom lineage to recreate them, because as far as I can tell, there is no other viable counterpart in D&D. With custom lineage then, we are going to take dark vision instead of the skill, because I think it's reasonable that harrowers can see in low light environments, given that they're made up of a bunch of insects. For our free feat from custom lineage, we're going to want to take the poisoner feat. We're not necessarily looking to make poisons with this feat, but we do want to deal poison damage, and this feat allows us to ignore resistance to poison damage when we deal damage with a poison spell. And for what it's worth, if we did want to apply poison to a weapon or make our own poisons, this gives us support for both of those types of features too. For our stats, we're only getting a +2, and we're going to want to put that into our charisma. However, we still want the rest of our ability scores to be relatively good, so after point buy, we're going to want the following ability scores: 8 strength, 14 dexterity, 12 constitution, 10 intelligence, 14 wisdom, and 16 charisma. We're going to want wisdom and charisma to relatively be our main go-to stats, but you can feel free to switch either of those around if you really want to. Finally, for our background, anything that feels thematically appropriate for us being a hive mind creature or perhaps a sort of eldritch being would probably work. Something like Haunted One kind of comes to mind because it could probably be themed to be appropriate, but you can pick your favorite. Starting off our build at level 1, we are a Warlock 1. As a Warlock 1, we gain Pack Magic and a Patron. And for any cantrip or spell that we get, I'm saying you can pick your favorite with one caveat in mind. We want thematic spells that are appropriate for us. We're not going to restrict ourselves, we're just going to keep our eye out for any spell that feels like the Plague Herald should have it. So, those would be anything that either inflict the poison condition or deal poison damage, anything that inflicts a Gloomhaven type condition or can buff ourselves with a Gloomhaven type condition, such as how temporary HP gives us a Gloomhaven shield effect, or any spells that can take away enemy actions can kind of count as a stun effect, or any AoE or multi-target attack spells, as those will also be very helpful for us. For our patron, I'm going to bite a big bullet here and say that we are going to be the Undying Warlock. Not the Undead, the Undying. The Undying is easily one of the lesser known, if not most forgotten, Warlock subclass, and it's really not that great. It's right up there with like the Purple Dragon Knight, as well as a few other subclasses that are notoriously not very well designed. The reason we're going Undying is twofold. Number one, we want Ray of Sickness. It is our bread and butter spell that gives us access to applying the poison condition, as well as dealing poison damage. The other reason we want the Undying Warlock is because thematically, that makes us a creature that isn't necessarily undead, but also is able to perpetually extend their life. And just like our flavor text said, our Harrower Plague Herald is technically capable of that, given that we are a creature that is an amalgamation of smaller insects that act as a hive mind instead of just one organic creature. The actual feature we get, or as an Undying Warlock at Warlock 1, is Among the Dead. It gives us the Spare the Dying cantrip, it gives us advantage on saving throws against any disease, and when undead try to harm us, we get a passive effect that kind of acts like the Sanctuary spell. So while this subclass is certainly more thematically appropriate than mechanically powerful, we're still going to take it and write it out, since it gave us access to Ray of Sickness right away, and because it could use a little bit of love. At level 2, we're a Warlock 2, and here we gain Invocations, which we also get 2 of. For the Invocations, we are going to choose Thief of 5 Fates to be able to cast Bane with a Warlock spell slot once per long rest. Then we can also choose any one other invocation that you really like. The only reason I'm definitely saying Thief of 5 Fates is because the Bane spell acts like a curse effect. So we're definitely going to want that because the Warlock doesn't gain Bane normally anyway, and this will allow us to at least have access to it. On level 3, we are a Warlock 3, and here we gain our Pact Boon. Pick your favorite for these. If you want to be a bit more support focused, pick Pact of the Talisman, because its invocations can certainly give a lot of support and utility options. If you just want to focus a bit more on range and spell casting, pick Pact of the Tome. We can gain a few more cantrips that the Warlock doesn't really get access to, including some that'll actually give us poison damage, which is why I'm going to say we're taking it, but I'm not going to worry too much about the actual Pact of the Tome invocations. At level 4, we are Warlock 4, and here we gain our first ability score increase or feat. Because there are a few other feats that we also want, I'm going to say we're going to pick those up now, and we'll worry about scaling later. But for us, we're going to take Metamagic Adept. Metamagic Adept gives us 2 sorcery points and 2 metamagic features to use those sorcery points with. And for our metamagic options, we're going to take Twin Spell and then one other metamagic option that you really like. The other one doesn't really matter. The reason I want to take Twin Spell is because for those times when we actually cast Ray of Sickness, we want to be able to twin it in order to get the most poison onto the battlefield as quickly as possible. At level 5, we are Warlock 5. Here we just gain 3rd level spells. I also glossed over the 2nd level spells, but again, feel free to choose any of those that you wanted to, just keeping to our criteria of what we're thematically looking for. And the other thing we get at 5th level is a 3rd invocation, and this invocation actually really does matter. For us, we want Cloak of Flies. Book of Flies is a Warlock invocation that required us to be 5th level, so I figured it would be best to just shoot up to 5th level as a Warlock first, and then pick it up. Cloak of Flies says, as a bonus action, we surround ourselves with a magical aura that looks like buzzing flies. That aura extends 5 feet from us in every direction, but not through total cover, and then it lasts until we're either incapacitated or we could just dismiss it as a bonus action. The aura grants us advantage on intimidation checks, but disadvantage on every other charisma check. And then any other creature that starts its turn in the aura just takes poison damage equal to our charisma modifier. Now this is really awesome because it's just passive damage whenever anything tries to walk up and melee us. There is a limit on this invocation, and once we use it, we have to complete a rest before we can use it again. But ideally, we'll just have this up all the time. And the reason we want this up all the time is because we're a harrower. We are made of flying and buzzing insects. So a Cloak of Flies that just gives us a passive advantage on intimidation and an aura of damage that just occurs around us is really, really thematically appropriate, and is honestly the main reason why I wanted to be a Warlock in the first place for this build. Level 6, we are going to jump over to Druid. And as a Druid 1, we gain Druidic and Spellcasting. At level 7, we are a Druid 2, and here's the reason I'm growing Druid. We gain our Druidic Circle, or Druid subclass, and that is Circle of Spores. The Circle of Spores just gives us more of the Harrower type of theme. We gain Circle spells first of all, which gives us access to Chill Touch, and eventually some extra spells that will also be thematically appropriate. And then we also gain Halo of Spores and Symbiotic Entity. Symbiotic Entity says that we can use our Wild Shape feature to not turn into an animal, but instead awaken spores within us. I would theme it as awakening the swarm within us. We gain 4 temporary hit points for each level in Druid that we have, and as long as we have those temporary hit points up, our melee weapon attacks deal an extra 1d6 necrotic damage to any target that they hit, which if we took back to the blade would be very nice for a melee build, but we weren't building for that, so that's fine. And our Halo of Spores damage, which I'll get to in a second, gets to roll a second damage die and add it to the total. That's a really awesome feature to just make us feel even more like a harrower. And the Halo of Spores feature is really nice for pairing with our Cloak of Flies feature, because it is a reaction that we get to use when a creature we see moves into a space within 10 feet of us or starts its turn there. We can just use our reaction to deal a d4 necrotic damage to that creature unless it succeeds on a Constitution saving throw against our Wisdom save DC. That necrotic damage will increase, and our Wisdom DC isn't that great, but given that it's just all the time, as long as we're okay using our reaction, it's going to be really powerful. Any creature that starts its turn within 5 feet of us is not only going to take the d4, potentially 2d4 if we have Symbiotic Entity up, but also our Charisma modifier in poison damage because of Cloak of Flies. Basically, it's a lot of little increments of damage that will hopefully really add up over time. But more importantly than all of that, it's very thematically appropriate, and we now feel like a full-on harrower. At level 8, we are Druid 3. Here we just gain 2nd level Druid spells, so feel free to pick your favorites. I will also say for multi-classing with Warlock, because we can just interchange our pack magic with our actual full caster Druid spell slots, we could just cast our charisma-based Warlock spells a lot more often than what we could when we were just a Warlock. Totally up to you as to which way you want to play this, but either way, we're a Druid 3. Level 9, we are a Druid 4, and we gain another ability score increase 4 feet, and this is the time that we want to increase our ability scores. I'm going to say that we're going to increase our Charisma to 18 and probably just rely on that primarily for our actual spell casting, damage, etc. However, if you wanted to, you could increase your Wisdom to 16 to make them both on par with one another, so it doesn't matter which one you favor more. There are maybe some feats that we want to pick up, but we'll get to those later. For right now, improve an ability score that you like to use, and just call it a day. At level 10, we are a 5th level Druid, and now we have 3rd level Druid spells. We don't gain much else, so pick any spells that you would like based on our theme, and whatever ability score you increased last level. At level 11, we are back to Warlock 6, and here we gain the next Undying Warlock subclass feature. That feature is Defy Death. We can regain hit points equal to 1d8 plus our Constitution modifier when we succeed on a death saving throw, or whenever we stabilize a creature with Spare the Dying. And then once we use this feature, we can't use it again until we finish a long rest. Now, sparing a creature on Spare the Dying is kind of an odd time for us to heal ourselves, but we could technically do it. However, having this feature allow us to just succeed on a death saving throw and then give ourselves hit points to be able to get up, to then hopefully survive long enough to be able to cast another spell and get back into the combat, actually isn't too bad, at least on paper. At level 12, we are Warlock 7, and here we gain Warlock spells that are 4th level, so feel free to choose any 4th level Warlock spells that you would like that again fit our theme criteria. We also gain a 4th invocation, and because we already picked up the invocations that we really want, Thief of 5 Fates as well as Cloak of Flies, pick any invocations you would like here. There are a lot of good options since we already have the 2 that we really want out of the way, and we're also a 7th level Warlock, so we've met the prerequisite for a fair number of the invocations that do exist. Level 13, we're now a Warlock 8, and that means we get another ability score improvement or feat. Here is definitely time to increase one of our 2 main ability scores, either Wisdom or Charisma, and get them a little bit higher. If our Charisma was 18, we could cap it at 20 and just never really worry about Wisdom. If we're neck and neck and they're both at 16, then it's time to bump one of the 2 up to 18 and hopefully increase the other one a little later on. At level 14, we are Druid 6, and Druid 6 gets our next Circle of Spores feature. That feature is Fungal Infestation. Fungal Infestation says that if a beast or a humanoid that is small or medium size dies within 10 feet of us, we can use our reaction to reanimate it, causing it to immediately stand up with 1 hit point. It'll then take its turn immediately after ours, and the only action it can take is the attack action to make 1 melee attack. We can use the feature a number of times equal to our Wisdom modifier, so we have at least a couple uses of it, if not a lot of uses, depending on how much you prioritized Wisdom for this build. At level 15, we're a Druid 7, and because I didn't mention it last level, I'll mention it this level. We're just sticking with Druid. We're not going back to Warlock anymore, since that doesn't give us any features that we really want, and because if we did, we'd probably end up missing out on another ability score improvement or feat. As a Druid 7, we gain 4th level Druid spell slots. We gain 4th level Druid spell slots and spells. Feel free to again choose any spells that you think would really work well for our build, keeping in mind the thematic criteria that we want to at least keep an eye out for. At level 16, we are a Druid 8, and we gain another ability score improvement / feat. And here it's time to increase another ability score. I'm going to say for the sake of this build that we're actually neck and neck on 18 for each of them. That way it doesn't matter which ability score we're using when we're casting our spells, and any features that scale off of those ability scores respectively will both be relatively strong. At level 17, we're now a Druid 9, and here we just gain 5th level Druid spells, not much else. Level 18, we are a Druid 10, and here we gain our next Circle of Spores feature. For us, it is Spreading Spores. Spreading Spores says that as a bonus action, while we have our Symbiotic Entity feature active, we can hurl spores up to 30 feet away from us. They will then swirl in a 10-foot cube for 1 minute, and they'll disappear early if we use the feature again, or dismiss them as a bonus action, or if we lose our Symbiotic Entity. Whenever a creature moves into this cube or starts its turn there, that creature will take our Halo of Spores damage, unless of course that creature succeeds on a con save. The creature can also not take this damage more than once per turn, so even if we could force movement them into and out of the cube of spores over and over again, it doesn't actually work too well. Also, as long as the cube persists, we can't use our Halo of Spores reaction, but that's also an upside because then we don't need to spend our reaction to use the Halo of Spores feature. I will also mention, because it has increased, and because the new Spreading Spores feature does use it, our Halo of Spores damage is now a D8, or 2d8 as long as we have Symbiotic Entity up. And yes, that would affect the Spreading Spores feature as well, because that says we do Halo of Spores damage, and our Halo of Spores damage always deals 2 damage dice instead of 1, as long as we have Symbiotic Entity up. Level 19, we are Druid 11, and we gain 6th level Druid spells. As per usual for the spells in this build, pick your favorites that just follow the same criteria. Finally, at level 20, we are now a Druid 12, and we gain our last ability score improvement / feat. What we do want to pick up here, though, is the feat Eldritch Adept. Eldritch Adept just gives us access to 1 extra Eldritch invocation. And because of how poor our scaling was, we wanted to wait until level 20 to get it, because really it's nothing more than just a passive bonus that can make us a little bit more thematically appropriate. So we can now go back and pick a 5th Warlock invocation that feels thematically appropriate for us to have as the Plague Herald. Alright, time to summarize what we have. We are at least a close facsimile of the Plague Herald. Right off the bat, our main regrets are that A, poison is not a great condition or damage type to build around in D&D. And even though we can ignore resistance, a lot of enemies will still have immunity to either poison damage or just the poison condition itself. We also can't poison our allies to get a bonus on our attacks or other actions, which that's not really too important, but it is a viable playstyle that the Plague Herald has in Gloomhaven, and it's fairly interesting as it adds an element of risk and reward to the game. Finally, we also have limited curse effects, and they don't boost our damage at all. The Plague Herald does have a build that they can just go curse a bunch of enemies, debuff them so that they're more likely to miss with those curses, and then every time an enemy draws a curse card, they'll take damage. Not only can we just not do that damage aspect, but the only actual curse effect we have is the spell Bane, since curse is meant to make an enemy more likely to miss, but not give them disadvantage per se. Unless we picked any other spells up along the way that I hadn't fully accounted for, but that you might have found. And really, we're just using the Thief of Five Fates invocation to cast Bane with a high-level Warlock spell slot, and hoping that we can just have as many enemies as possible be debuffed and more likely to miss. Thematically, though, we're really alright, pretty much. We have access to flying if we picked up the fly spell and if we wanted to use that, because the Plague Herald does have the ability to just gain flying as a condition. We have Thief of Five Fates as a bit of curse, and we have as much poison damage as possible to have grabbed. We literally took an entire Warlock subclass just so we could gain Ray of Sickness as our first spell. Plus we also have meta magic to be able to twin some spells that are usually single target spells. Hopefully we've also picked up a lot of area of effect spells too, and we have, of course, our Spreading Spores class feature, which is also an area of effect ability. So we have lots of those mechanical features that the Plague Herald has access to. And as far as our theme itself goes, we are very otherworldly. We're certainly insect-like. We're definitely an alien, undying type creature. We have a cloak of flies. Our wild shape can make us a symbiotic entity. And we, for the most part, are relatively undying. Though admittedly, if you wanted more thematic undying features, you could continue up into that subclass, because the only other features that you get from that subclass are largely thematic ones, nothing that's mechanically beneficial, really. All of this really adds up to make us feel like a Harrower in Gloomhaven. And overall, we're probably as close as we can get to the Plague Herald specifically. Let me know what you thought of the build, or what you would change, or maybe even what I missed that would allow us to get closer to the Plague Herald theme. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.